My
All
parents
right.
call. That's sneaky.
All right, everybody. So we'll go ahead and get started. And if other people decide to join us, we'll just let them in as they arrive. So welcome so much. We're so pleased that you've taken some time this evening to join us for our talk about the past and future of Rosewell Plantation. This is sponsored by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So a thank you to them for sponsoring this talk. My name is Lori Comlin, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Forbes House Museum. And before I get into further introductions, I just wanted to relay a few Zoom tips for our time together. I know you all have probably done Zoom a million times, but anyways, just during the talk, we'll ask everyone to mute their microphones. But when the talk concludes and opens up for questions and answers, you can please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you would like. Alternatively, if you don't want to do that, you can also put questions in the chat during the talk, and then I'm happy to relay those for you. We are recording tonight's talk, and we'll send out a link afterwards to all of the attendees in a few days. Okay, so on to the introductions. So I'm going to introduce the different organizations that are hosting tonight, and I will introduce our speakers. So to first introduce the Forbes House Museum, if you are not familiar with us, we are located in Milton, Massachusetts, on land that was stewarded by the Neponset group of the indigenous Massachusetts people until the 18th century. In the 18th century, it was then the home of Thomas Hutchinson, the very last royal civilian governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony before the American Revolution. In 1833, the Forbes Mansion was built by Captain Robert Bennett Forbes and his brother John Murray Forbes, both of whom were involved in America's early China trade. And later, the captain conducted the United States' very first international humanitarian aid mission, providing relief to the Irish people during that country's Great Famine. And John Murray Forbes became a devoted abolitionist and advisor to Abraham Lincoln, as well as president of 2 railroads. Today, the museum maintains and stewards the mansion's grounds and a collection, which includes Chinese export art and porcelain, items from the captain's Irish voyage, and Civil War and Abraham Lincoln memorabilia. And speaking of preservation, we are currently endeavoring to restore our carriage house and barn, which was designed in part by the renowned 19th century architectural firm of Peabody and Stearns. And similar to Rosewell Plantation, the museum is on the National Register of Historic Places. So Adventures in Preservation, which is also hosting tonight, is a nonprofit organization that for the past 25 years has been dedicated to offering unique opportunities for volunteers to get involved in historic preservation projects around the world. Passionate about saving the world's architectural heritage, AIP, as it's known, works to bring people and preservation together in a meaningful partnership to save buildings for integrated community use. Past and future projects, which you can join, include Dunan's Castle in Scotland, various buildings in Gyumri, Armenia, and working with tonight's speakers at Rosewell Plantation. So I'd like to now introduce tonight's speakers, whose mission it is to promote and involve the public in hands-on archaeology, preservation, and education activities through their foundation called Fairfield Foundation. They operate 5 properties in Gloucester County, Virginia. Those are the Fairfield Archaeology Park, Timberneck House, Edge Hill, Texaco, the Walter Reed Birthplace, and of course, Rosewell Plantation Ruins and Visitor Center. So our speakers, first up is Dr. David A. Brown. He is the co-director of the Fairfield Foundation, a not-for-profit organization based in Gloucester that focuses on archaeology, historic preservation, and educational outreach. He's also co-owner of Data Investigations, cultural resource management firm that serves Eastern Virginia, specializing in work with municipalities, nonprofits, and private individuals and businesses. In his spare time, he's an adjunct professor of history at the College of William and Mary, teaching public history and historic preservation. And also tonight we have Thane H. Harpel, who has served as co-director, there he is, hi Thane, of Fairfield Foundation since its founding in 2000. He received his BA in anthropology and history from the College of William and Mary and has worked as an archaeologist at the William and Mary Center for Archaeological Research and George Washington's Mount Vernon. He's also a co-owner of Data Investigations and has worked on dozens of sites across the Middle Peninsula and beyond, conducting excavations and historic research and leading many public archaeology projects. Mr. Harpel also serves as president of the Middle Peninsula chapter of the Archaeological Society of Virginia and is a member of the Gloucester Historical Committee. And our third speaker is Kenneth Tappan. Hi, there he is. And he graduated from Christopher Newport University and shortly thereafter started work at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation in the Historic Masonry program, which focuses on both the production of brick and lime using 18th century methods, as well as 18th century building techniques. In his 15 years at Colonial Williamsburg, he has assisted with the reconstruction of 18th century style buildings from scratch and the restoration efforts of many 18th and 17th century buildings. And with that, I am going to turn the evening over to our speakers. Welcome, thank you.
Hey, welcome everybody. All right.
All right. So I know David's got some slides that he's just going to put up for us.
1 second.
Y'all close it out.
I just said stop sharing.
Oh, stop sharing. We love to share. Sharing is caring.
Yes.
And sharing is now.
Yeah, so just wanted to talk about the site at Rosewell and just give some context, not just with the building's history, but also the hands that made it, and that's something that is ever important, not just for us, but really in the whole field of interpretation and history. But Rosewell is really an exceptional site, and we're very excited to share it with you guys tonight. So do I? There we go.
We will use the key.
There we go.
It says advance. Hold on. This is why we do the technical run through ahead of time.
There we go. So yeah, just a brief timeline. You guys obviously can read this, but I'll just read it out loud. 1639, George Menifee patents 3,000 acres that later becomes Rosewell. There's also two other peninsulas right beside Rosewell that are part of that. Timberneck, which is also one of our properties that we are actively restoring. Right next door, Shelley, and of course, Rosewell. The first house at Rosewell was consumed by fire in 1721. And in 1725, Man Page decides to build this ginormous monolith of a home. He does not live to see the end of the construction. His son, Man Page II, completes it with the help of his father-in-law. And by 1837, the Rosewell is out of the Page family and is sold. So it doesn't stay in the family for really all that long. But ultimately, 1916 is the final nail in the coffin for Rosewell, and as a whole structure. Yeah.
There's a little bit of fun with some of the noteworthy people that end up being part of this. It gets Thomas Jefferson gets dragged into this, and one of the John Page that you see referenced, he's the governor of Virginia. So you get all the bells and whistles of famous people, but one of the things we've always been fascinated with is the craftsmanship, both of the enslaved as well as those who were brought in as tenant farmers or, skilled laborers. And it's one of the advantages we have now that we're in charge of interpretation to marry both the kind of important people as well as those who may never be known by name, but were simply crucial to understanding what this can tell us about life in Virginia in the 18th and 19th centuries. So, yeah, Rosewell for us has always been famous more than just for the people who are there. But it doesn't hurt to have a couple of names that kind of draw people in, especially founding fathers and wealthy elites of that period. The grandeur can start to can hook you, but ultimately we're looking to ground people in the everyday, and particularly the tactile experience of being next to this huge brick building.
Yeah. So architecturally, what really makes Rosewell special are the details. Okay, I really want to just harp on that. So the size is absolutely massive, but really the gauged brickwork. And just to define that for everybody, gauged brickwork is essentially the carving of brick after it's been fired to dimensions that are so precise. They are literally like mathematical precise. I mean, it is the amount of skill to do a doorway, like in the photo that you see in front of you, with all those bricks. Each one is hand carved after the fact, and those kind of details really set Rosewell apart, in my opinion. 18th century sources of skilled bricklayers that do this kind of gauged work. The estimation is about an hour per brick. And we're talking thousands and thousands of these bricks, not just in the doorway that you see. Both the north and the south entrances have these they're no longer there because those bricks were, when as a ruin, Rosewell gets kind of robbed out because people wanted a little piece of it. But not just the entrances, but there are also the transition between the foundation and the first floor, which is called the water table, and two belt courses. There's kind of a protrusion of brick between the first and the second floor and the second and the third. The water table and both of those belt courses are all different designs, which means they just can't mass produce just one shape, three shapes. They're doing all kinds of stuff. And another aspect is the stonework. Around here in Tidewater, Virginia, stone is simply is not around. I mean, so every single one of these windows, with these keystones, the tops of the chimneys with the stonework, unbelievably impressive to an 18th century Virginian. They shipped that across an ocean. So showing off that level of detail, everything about Rosewell is conveying wealth and influence. And another thing that's really, really interesting and something that I'm personally really discovering is the exterior Rosewell it's almost perfect. And just matching that aesthetic for me has been difficult. And giving an example of what I'm trying to talk about, like the mortar joint at Rosewell is on average on the exterior about 1/4 of an inch. Whereas a normal mortar joint in this period is about 3/8, sometimes even 5/8 of an inch. And when you're using hand molded bricks, not one brick is the same. Okay, by having that mortar joint just a little thicker, it gives that brick layer a little play, a little wiggle. All right, because in reality, when you see courses of bricks, you really look close, you see those bricks kind of moving up like that. They're moving, but that brick layer is manipulating the mortar to make an imperfect material appear to be more perfect than it is. But by giving yourself that tiny mortar joint, you're taking the extra time to make a brick that won't have any kind of curves, any kind of really obvious folds. And it's from someone who's molded way too many bricks in my life. You can do that, but you're adding about an extra 45 seconds to about a little under a minute on each mold to make that brick that perfect. And at first that sounds like not a big deal, but the scope of Rosewell is unbelievable. Like we're talking, and we'll get to that slide in just a second. In fact, why don't we do it now? The whole of Rosewell, approximately about 700,000 bricks. Okay, and again, that's a big number, and it's hard to even understand that number without context. And I'll try to rein it in a little bit. But keep in mind, we don't have a lot of records of brick making from the period. simply because it's so commonplace. But luckily, we do have a few references. One from Jefferson, he talks about kind of daily output when he's observing enslaved laborers in Philadelphia. He writes down, in his opinion, 3 men and 1 boy should be able to make 2,000 bricks in a day. And that sounds at first like, no way. But you can imagine if you're a molder, working 12, 14 hours a day with the sun, you're going to get pretty efficient at it. We also see English references saying a good brick maker should be able to make 1,000 bricks in a day. If you give that same good brick maker 2 laborers and a child, they could be expected to make 3,000 in a day. So that 2,000 a day mark he writes down is probably more accurate than a lot of people think. He also writes down that after 1 summer of production of brick at Monticello, his home in Charlottesville, that they ended up making and burning 106,000 brick. So we're looking at the brick making for Rosewell probably took 6 to 8 years, which is pretty wild to think about. Yeah. Well, it depends on production. Yeah. So there's some wiggle there, But yeah, and also the logistical challenge to build something this big as a private project. This is not a government project. This is not the church. They got everybody else's money. This is a private project. One thing that I really want to harp on with people is when this is an industrial site, when this building is being created, any kind of labor you can think of, it's here. Whether it's enslaved labor, free blacks, local tradesmen, and even tradesmen even brought in from England potentially to do that gauged work, that carving. But another thing to consider too is if you need that many brick, you don't want to have to move it very far. All right. So luckily in our region, clay is very abundant. So making the brick right on that construction site is the way you want to go about it. So again, setting up a temporary brickyard, burning hundreds of thousands of bricks every fall after a summer of production, it had to be quite the sight to see. But of course, a brick house is more than just bricks. There's also mortar, and that alone is quite the undertaking as well. So in our region, we don't have access to stone. I've kind of mentioned that already. So mortar is going to be made from lime historically, and for most of human history. Before cement kind of became king. In our region, it's the oyster shell. So unbelievable hundreds of tons of shell had to be burned, not just for mortar, plaster, whitewash. Even there's agricultural uses for lime as well. And going into, that bringing on the outside bricklayers from England to do the gauge work, we're kind of feeling, it's some conjecture, I have to admit, but really feel that they were brought from England because the construction of Rosewell also coincides with a church on the northern neck of Virginia called Christ Church. And we know that Robert Carter actually did hire bricklayers from England for that work. And the work at Christ Church and the work at Rosewell really mirrors very closely together. Again, that's a lot. That's an extra cost. And I talked about earlier what the expectation of an 18th century bricklayer carving one of those bricks an hour. If you put a brick in front of me and I have to carve it, it's going to take me like 6-7 hours, and there's going to be a lot of cursing in between. I mean, it's very frustrating. But yeah, the whole complex of the plantation, it's so extensive. It really is. Do you guys have anything to say? Or no? Okay.
No, it's awesome.
Yeah. In the photo on the right there, that's actually something that we did. Was it last week? My goodness. The Rick. Yeah. So we actually did a small firing of oyster shell. What you're looking at there is looks like a little alien ship kind of landing, but that's called a lime rick or an oyster rick. And that is a way of burning shell if you don't have access to a permanent kiln. And those are 5 to 6 foot poles, and there's a layer of shell in the middle of that and a layer of shell on top. And that central part is called the wick, and we burn that. And the key is to burn those shells to about 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you like fire, you should have been here last weekend. It's pretty awesome. But afterwards, that shell has changed chemically. We've actually burned the carbon dioxide out of it. You know, limestone, chalk, marble, coral, oyster shell, it's all calcium carbonate. So by burning it, we burn out that carbon dioxide. And by later adding water, that sets off an exothermic reaction that actually converts that shell to kind of a putty. And that's what we did. We used that putty for plaster. We're going to be using that potentially in the future at our one of our properties, Timber Neck. For mortar, it's a little more finicky how you process it, but yeah, it takes an enormous amount of fuel to burn oyster shell and also burning brick. Burning brick is we're talking a fire up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, the most expensive thing about brick is the firewood. And brick in itself is something that, although it seems commonplace, it really wasn't back then. I mean, having a brick home is an absolute sign of wealth. It's a sign of permanence, okay? And it also doesn't catch on fire, but ironically, 1916 happened at Rosewell and it does catch on fire. But the brick wasn't the issue there. But yeah, it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of firewood. Everything about brick it's a big luxury item in this region in the 18th and 17th century. Yeah. So these are a few photos of some homes that are local. So the two-story brick home, but one's the Nelson House that's on in Yorktown on the left. One in the middle there is the With House, which is a two-story brick home in Williamsburg. And in the upper right corner is a building called Pear Valley. So these two-story brick homes are roughly about $250,000 brick. Okay, so just trying to get you to understand the difference between a two-story house and a three-story house with the scale of Rosewell, it really gets big. In fact, when you're building with brick structurally, you're really limited on how tall you can go because you can imagine those foundations get real wide. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of material. But one thing I love about the framed home, Pear Valley, is if you got a home like that in the 18th or 17th century in Virginia, you are making it. You know, you are a little, you're like middle class, and you're making it. And so when we kind of understand what a middle class, you know, dwelling looks like in the period, you know, that really puts Rosewell into a lot of context. Like there's a lot of hubris going on, a lot of ego, showing off, a lot that really trying to really build that influence politically with your neighbors and the Burgesses right across the river in Williamsburg. It is unnecessary, but it seemed necessary to the pages. But yeah, even in outside of city environments, seeing fireplaces and chimneys made of even mud and wood, what are called caddet chimneys, are more normal than you think. Now they're outlawed in city environments, but on the frontier in the countryside, they're perfectly normal, and they work until they don't work. You know, they'll catch on fire eventually. But you think good?
No.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Well, I was going to move on.
Go for it.
So, as we really just started the another layer of stabilization. The first efforts were done in the early 1980s through almost the 2001, I think. And now we're hitting it again. All right. And the biggest issue we have with the building is arches. Okay. The missing arches. You know, all these window openings with all those keystones, a lot of all that's missing in a lot of the cases. And because of that, when you look up into an arch, you see bricks just kind of just floating there, just the bond between the mortar and the brick. And here's the thing, and we all know it. Father Time is undefeated. Nature will always win. And so it needs to happen. And what we're doing is stabilization. We're not rebuilding this sucker. I mean, this is unbelievable building to try to ever even imagine reconstructing. But we have to, you know, rebuild certain arches to kind of give the ruin some stability. And really the word I always use, cohesion. All right. We want everything kind of moving together. If we got certain parts of the ruin that are moving in a slightly different way and other parts that just accelerates damage. So tying the masonry back together by reintroducing these arches for the fireboxes and the window arches will give this ruin many more years of life. Another thing about a ruin is it's dealing with environmental challenges that it was never intended to do, deal with, I should say. The nature of making brick on a construction site means that they're not all of the same quality.
Your screen
Okay.
just went off I'm sorry to interrupt, but the slide just went off for a moment.
Is it back?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. You can imagine, if your oven is made out of the bricks that you want to cook, they're not going to all get cooked the same, So a big 12-foot stack of every single brick you made all summer, yeah, the temperature at the bottom's 2,000 degrees, but the top's probably around 1,600 degrees. And then those temperature changes affect the quality of the brick. And more specifically about how it handles water. It's all about water, okay? So when you look at any kind of historic brick home, you'll see darker bricks, you'll see lighter bricks, and that's kind of reflecting what temperature they're fired at. And oftentimes, the underfired bricks would be utilized for interior work, where they shouldn't have exposure to rain and the elements. Those underfired bricks, the issue is they're not weak, but they're big sponges. They really are. In fact, brick is considered a soft material. Water travels through it. And a brick that's cooked at higher temperatures, that pore structure is much, much tighter, so less water gets into it. But those underfired bricks, we've measured this before. An underfired salmon brick is what they're called. A salmon brick can take up to 40% of its weight in water. And you got a hard freeze, the brick just wants to go. So we're dealing with that issue as well. So as a ruin, we have issues that are never going to go away. In fact, the work that we do on this building, it's not something that upsets me at all, but it's going to have to be redone by the next generation. It's always going to need work. Okay. But yeah. Anything now?
I just want to add so I think a lot of the initial work that was done, Kenneth mentioned, starting in the early 80s, they first had to clear the ruin of vines and trees. It was completely overgrown at that point. And they added structural steel beams, you can see in the picture, with the goal of making sure that the individual parts of the ruin weren't moving. And then they did some work, recapping the chimneys and initial stabilization work. So I think what we're doing is now really the second chapter in the ruin stabilization. There was a study done around 2008 that kind of gave us the pathway forward for addressing what areas of the ruin need to be worked on to get us to a point where it continues to be a stable ruin, not to rebuild it. And so it kind of highlighted all these different points, and that's what working with Kenneth, that's what he is focusing on, is going around the structure, reevaluating what they had suggested before, and prioritizing what needs to be done in order to bring this to the next level of stabilization. And we're also looking forward to the future of potentially some larger interventions that can allow people to get into the ruin in a safe manner, but those all require additional engineering and other steps. So we're focusing on really that next phase of stabilization, which will, the ruin's been stable for quite a while. Now we want to take to the next level and actually restore certain elements that bring back, even safer level of stabilization and really help display the ruin in a much better situation.
And to throw my own 2 cents in at the end, one of the kind of cautionary tales from all of this is just recognizing that we have to try to do no harm while also trying to keep that harm that's already existing from accelerating. People ask us all the time, are you going to rebuild the building? And I mean, absent somebody coming through with $100 million, the idea is that we're going to largely look to try to keep that experience of seeing a romantic ruin, but one that's constantly engaging with the public, something that's accessible. Because the best part of the ruin isn't necessarily, being able to see a picture of it or understanding how it fell apart or even was constructed, but literally being in the presence of it. It's one of those moments that defies being captured in a digital form, although we do a lot of that. We do a lot of drone documentation, photogrammetry, and looking at how incremental changes to the building, stabilization over time. But offering the opportunity for the public to get up reasonably close, to be able to experience being in the presence of it on a landscape that we're just beginning to understand. And then, to be a part of its preservation, I think that's just a remarkable instance that, it's helped us on our other preservation projects. People want to be involved. They want to feel as if they've done something. They wouldn't mind leaving their own mark, and usually in a positive but relatively small fashion, so that they could always come back and remember that they did something, that their contribution was noteworthy. And it's a principle that we've extended to all of our preservation projects. And we really hope people here and others who hear about the project will, see that as a real benefit. Not only getting to work with great people, but also getting to visit, experience the site, contribute to its preservation with their own, not blood, but also sweat and tears. Although no crying allowed. There's no crying in preservation.
Sometimes.
Honestly, there's a lot of
there
crying
is,
in
actually,
preservation. So, yeah. Tears of joy. That's what we'll call it. We all know that's not right, but it's okay. So yeah, this is a great opportunity for us to be able to share something with you guys, something that we all love, and that we're hoping that it grows not only through our continued work, but your involvement. We benefit greatly. We have recently received grants from the Cabell Foundation, which is a charitable group here in Virginia, as well as the Virginia 250 Fund, that provided increasing access for visitors, especially in light of the upcoming celebration that starts this year, next year. Next year.
Many years of the 250th anniversary of the country.
Where the governor of Virginia decided to put aside some substantial grants to sites. And our grant helped us not only with bathrooms on site, so another selling point for coming and working with us, really nice bathrooms, but also, we've been using the stabilization of the ruin as part of our match towards those very generous grants from the state. So yeah, we have a great deal of support for this, and looking forward to having folks be a part of it, as we get to go ahead and to do a lot of restoration work, whereas the last 20 years was more about planning than actual working. So a great time to be involved.
And I want to also say, there's so much value in keeping it as a ruin. Myself and a lot of the people I've worked with through the years, we kind of geek out about seeing a ruin, because if you see the building as a whole, you don't really get to see the bones. And that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited. The exterior of Rosewell is as close to perfect as an 18th century building can be. But as soon as you get on the interior, it's way more human. I mean, you're seeing the problems that the bricklayers and the builders are overcoming, and you're seeing exactly how they solved it. Again, they didn't care what it looked like because it was just going to get plastered over. So there, that idea of making it look absolutely perfect is not there. But it's telling that human story. And as a tradesman, I love feeling that connection to the tradesmen of the past. It's like, oh, I see an issue. How would I solve that? How would I try to troubleshoot that? And seeing what they did, okay, yeah, I see where they're coming from. That's the kind of human story that really just jives with me. I love it. And so as a ruin, I think it's actually more interesting. And I think a lot of architectural historians as a ruin, Rosewell has been something that people have studied for years. It really is something. And there's so much value of just seeing the mistakes and the human side of things, But yeah, Thane alluded earlier to some of the previous work, and we owe a lot to those guys. They really started from the top of that ruin and worked their way down the chimneys, and now we're taking the strategy of working from the bottom up. Hopefully, they'll meet in the middle at some point. But yeah, Jack Pete, who recently passed, but he's pretty renowned in this area as one of the first to kind of really bring real preservation to this part of Virginia. Big advocate for traditional lime mortars, because keep in mind, mortar dictates the life of a brick. Okay, lime is a real wonder material in my opinion. Lime is it has properties where it will pull water from other materials. So every building is wet. All right. How every big one of these big brick buildings are always going to deal with moisture issues. How does that water come out? And that breathing is happening through the mortar joint. Okay. Lime mortar will fail eventually if you do have a lot of water coming in and out. And if we were to repoint and introduce cements as we use in today's construction, we're basically trapping that water. Again, I said earlier, it's all about water. It really is. So, Jack and Cheetah, Lawrence Waller, they're known big time in the preservation field around here. And definitely following in their footsteps and after the work they've done in the past is part of the story. I mean, it always will be, and hopefully part of the story in the future will be us. Yeah, maybe they'll talk about this talk on Zoom one day. But there's a lot more work to do. This was the first year of us doing some stabilization work, and we have many, many, many more items to go on the ruin. So what I'm saying is there's lots of work for people if they want to get involved. And we always enjoy inviting people to work alongside us. So that's what I got for you guys. We would love to answer any questions that anybody has about the site or about the history, if anybody has anything.
Yeah, so we'll open it up for questions. If anybody has one, you are welcome to just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. I have lots of questions myself, so if nobody else has one, I'm happy to sort of start the ball rolling. I'll just see if anyone else has something first.
Hi, this is Karima Lewis, and I'm a history professor. And my question is not so much about the building, but I'm interested in the history of the two fires. I kind of study how enslaved people set fires. So I just wanted to, to resist their enslavement. I just want to know if you know anything about, who might have set those fires? Or how they were set.
There's a couple of different fires that took place that might be informative to the interests that you have. So there is the famous fire in 1916, and the legend behind it is not associated with a fire put there by someone of African descent.
Right.
It's basically a loose spark.
Okay.
We've seen plenty of, not plenty, we've seen several houses and plantation houses in particular in Gloucester County where there are legends about how the quote unquote slave lit fires so they would be forced to go to a city and live. There's a place nearby called Warner Hall, and that's one of the legends. And
what's the name of the hall?
Warner Hall, WARNERHALL. But there's an earlier fire that occurs in the kitchen. And unfortunately, it kills several enslaved Africans. This is, I think, 1740s or 41. And there was 11
kitchen of the Warner Hall, or
no,
one of your buildings.
41 example is at Rosewell. Rosewell has two forecourt dependencies, and one of them is destroyed in a fire in that year, 1741, and I believe kills 11 enslaved people who are most likely living upstairs or working within it, and could not. Well, they perished in the fire for reasons that there's no details contributing towards. So my sense is that they probably could not get out.
Yeah, and many enslaved people slept over the stove or the fireplace, or places like that. Oh, I'd like to hear more. Perhaps I can get your email. and
Sure.
see if you could send me some more information about that.
Happy to. We wrote a book on Warner Hall, and we can grab the excerpt and make sure that you have the citation.
Okay, I'll
So
buy the book. How about that?
that's getting more lucrative every day.
My
we can
maternal
make sure-
family comes from Virginia, so I feel kind of, and I used to live there, Newport
Cool.
News, Hampton area, so I'm kind of connected to Virginia. I know about Gloucester.
And I'll just
Excellent.
add,
If David's saying, and Kenneth, if you are okay, I can send out your email addresses. Oh, you just popped
Sure.
it in the chat. He just
I
popped it in the chat as well.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so
And I
much.
And I just want to add real quick so the initial fire that Kenneth mentioned, 1721, which destroyed presumably the earlier house and then maybe another building. The only reference we have to that is in a Boston newspaper, and it's like word from Virginia, and it just talks about Mr. Page's
Oh,
house.
yeah, Boston papers were the best in the 18th
Exactly,
and
because
17th
it's
century.
before it's before the Virginia Gazette has started, so there were no local papers that survived. So. Unfortunately,
Okay.
we don't know anything else about the circumstances of that fire. It's certainly interesting. It's not unusual, but yeah, what were the circumstances behind that? We don't know. But clearly that disaster caused Man Page to think even bigger. So for whatever reason, that happened. He then decided to come up with a giant plan for rebuilding. So
Thank you so much. I'll put my email in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Are there other questions? I was curious myself, in terms of, I know that you're doing archaeology on the site as well, and just wondering what kind of archaeological finds that you have discovered on the site that have maybe helped to tell the story. If you could maybe give us an idea of what has been found there.
you want to talk for another hour?
Yeah, we could easily do a second presentation, but some of the highlights. So there was originally some excavations done in the 1950s by a gentleman named Ivor Noel Hume, one of the premier historical archaeologists of that day and a founder of the discipline. He did some amazing work that brought up a lot of questions about indigenous people and their association with historic sites. Looking at the architecture of the house, the inclusion of the fine marble, but also was looking at everyday life. So was able to find a whole array of different domestic items, all from a trash pit that was just to the west of the house. At the same time, we had the amazing opportunity to excavate in the rubble of the cellar when they were evaluating the building's stabilization in 2006, 2007. And we were able to go down through 4.5, 5 feet of brick rubble to look at the layers of the collapsed house on the inside. So we went through the roof, and then we went through the attic, and then the third floor, and the second floor, and the first floor, finally reaching the cellar, and then the second brick floor, and then the first brick floor. Just absolutely amazing chronology in a way that you only usually get that with wells or really deep features. But seeing that and seeing some of the material culture is quite recognizable, especially during 1916 when it burns. So you're finding muffin tins and spatulas and things that you would recognize in your kitchen. Mixed in with them are 18th century carboys, the fragment of which is it's like a 2-foot tall wine bottle, and it's about 1.5 to 2 feet in diameter, and it's just huge. It carries a tremendous amount of wine. It's potentially 18th century or maybe 19th century, but it was certainly an older item within the assemblage. And so you're finding things that kind of confront how you look at the world, because the array of materials is so diverse because of the wealth that's there. At the same time, we were looking at areas around the plantation site to understand its landscape change. We found a soapstone vessel that would have been brought here in trade with indigenous peoples around 500 BC or maybe as earlier than that. So it gave some hint as to what was previous on the landscape and the connections with cultures beyond the enslaved Africans and the Europeans. Obviously, perhaps one of my favorite objects of all at Rosewell has been some of the colonial vessels that were found by Noel Hume in the 1950s, because they really speak to locally produced ceramics, most likely produced by enslaved Africans, and how they formed an integral part of everyday life, even though they may not, be gilded with gold or have complicated, patterns like we do on Chinese porcelain from the other half of the planet. So it's amazing. Thane, do you have some favorite things that you remember?
I don't necessarily have favorite things because that's always a difficult question for me, but because I like a lot of things. But the one thing I want to point out is in terms of the archaeology, and we honestly could speak for hours on it, because you have a massive landscape in the way that we look at. We often look at it as the plantation landscape, which with Rosewell is really 3,004 acres, and then actually some additional land. And we actually have two properties that are part of this 3,000 acre landscape, both Rosewell and Timberneck. And then we've done a little bit of work on the peninsula in the middle, Shelley. And all these sections of the plantation have native components as well, which have seen some level of archaeology. So there's a lot of interesting layers on these different portions. And it's one of our big questions, along with the Fairfield Plantation property, which is a neighbor to Rosewell, another several thousand acres. These really large agricultural landscapes, how did they evolve over time? Where did the people, that were on the land, mostly enslaved people in the colonial period and the 19th century, what were they doing? Where were they doing? What were their lives like? And what are the material evidence of those? These are a lot of the questions that we're trying to figure out on all of these properties. And so there's a lot of archaeological inquiry and research that we have and potential for doing more of that. So that really gets us excited. The buildings are obviously the focal point of a lot of these places, but there's so much more beyond those manor houses that there's lifetimes worth of work, and it's exciting every time we think about it.
Hello.
You mentioned that there's a cellar, and you also said that there is no stone in the area. So I'm just curious, what was the material down in the cellar? Was it lined by brick?
It's just built on top of
Or just
hard
dirt?
packed clay. Digging out the footings, and yeah, those walls are thick though. But yeah, it's not like we're building off a stone or anything like that around here.
How thick are the brick walls at the base?
At grade, it's 5 bricks thick. At grade, so below grade, that foundation's gonna expand. They're oftentimes building what are called spread footers. So below grade, that foundation expand a little bit. But I think it is 5 bricks thick.
I think that's about right. It's roughly 3 feet.
Yeah.
Is what we were able to measure.
Yeah.
And it goes about 6 feet into the ground from what we could tell.
So it's they call it an English cellar, which is seen as being like half below ground, half above ground. And so this one goes about 6 feet down. The base of the footing goes further, but it's necessary to expand that far out and be that broad because of the height and the sheer mass of weight that sits on top of it.
A lot of weight.
So, some people absolutely hate the building's design because they just see it as a big block of brick, and they're not wrong. It is nearly a cube of brick.
Especially when it's an earlier roof configuration.
Yeah, but when you think about the complexity of it, and we think about the humanity involved with it, it is hard to argue that this is not a kind of like an architectural phenomenon. Between design and actual creation, maintenance, and even the changes taking place over time, it's unrivaled within the colonies, just unrivaled. It was meant to compete with the governor's palace, and many architectural historians agree that it won.
Yeah, and there's a number of other Virginia plantation houses that people know and recognize. Almost all of them being built around the same time or within 20 years of Rosewell. You have Stratford Hall, you have Shirley, you have Westover, all these other really well-known houses, and Rosewell's bigger than all of them. The only one that potentially is more complex would be Stratford, but still not as big in terms of floor space. But certainly a bold, unusual design. But Rosewell really takes the cake in terms of size and complexity and the use of all the decorative gauge brickwork, plus the imported stone. I mean, it's just everything's over the top.
What is it that you all would like to see for the future of Rosewell? And when you talk about visitors coming, what is it that you're hoping visitors will understand because of the site? And what is it that you hope they might take away with them?
Well, me first and foremost, something doesn't come from nothing, and oftentimes a lot of the laborers and workers that are on these sites are always going to be labeled unskilled. And you look at Rosewell, they had skill. I mean, it's unbelievable. So telling that human story is obviously paramount. But in the future, if we can get people inside the ruin, let them get up into some spots that are really kind of show that story. And really, we can't safely do that at this point. So that's one of the big aspects of why it's important to stabilize. The one to keep the ruin up, obviously, but to give people more access so they can kind of have that light bulb moment of, oh, now I get it. Oh my gosh, this is a crazy building. Like the people that made this were unbelievably talented. And it's a real travesty. We don't know the names of any of them. So telling that story and also just getting more access for the public, that's how I would see the future for Rosewell. I would love to get people elevated in there, see the second floor, see the top of it, and also there's all kinds of stuff that happened in the 20th century at Rosewell. It's kind of fun. There's a lot of graffiti on it. I'll tell you that much. It used to be a place where I think high school kids went at night to drink beer and party. So a lot of liquid courage. If you climb up on the very top of this ruin, there's graffiti at the very top. And we rented a 50-foot lift early on when I first started here at Fairfield. And I mean, it's kind of scary when you're up there. I'm not gonna lie. Your heartbeat's making the lift move. And the fact that, I mean, there's so many stories to tell with the place, from the indigenous population through the 17th and up to the 20th century. I mean, all that is relevant. Do you have anything?
Oh, that was perfect. Yeah, no notes.
There's another question in the chat. How many Africans do you estimate were enslaved on Rosewell's property and maybe the surrounding properties?
So the question that is always asked about that question is when? Or do you want the totality of time during the period of enslavement? Because it's Gloucester's records are burned. In Virginia, we've got a thing called burned counties, and it's because they were either burned part of the Civil War things that occurred, or it was because of other issues with clerk's office records. Now, most of our property tax records survive, so 1782 until getting through into the 19th and 20th centuries, and those usually list the enslaved individuals associated with estates, but it gets complicated because a lot of those estates have multiple tracts of land, and then you're asking, okay, which slaves for which land, et cetera, et cetera. It's really, in our minds, it's important to cut to the chase. I wouldn't doubt that the Page family had over 100 enslaved Africans through most of their time when they owned Rosewell. And as far as having a certain number of people enslaved at a particular place, it would not be shocking in the least to have between 60 and 80 just on the plantation acreage, at Rosewell, Timberneck, Shelley, those three major plantations, all adjacent to one another, all within distance to one another, all with the likelihood of those individuals moving back and forth across them. So they might, and I can't time travel, so I can't guarantee it, but the enslaved may have seen it as their landscape across all three of those things as they took control of and managed a part of their world within this larger, wider world in the 18th century. Now, in 19th century Virginia, a lot of individual estates have a significant reduction in the number of enslaved Africans as they transition from tobacco to mixed grains. And ultimately, that's where you see a change, but you're still seeing a lot of those families persist on the same tracks. And so now you have generational numbers. And those generations, year after year and family after family, until you start to see a significant increase in the sale of families and the breaking up of people and their forceful movement into the Deep South. Those are really tragic moments. But it's one of those demographic changes that we have to understand so that we can, realize just how difficult the lives were, even on plantations as wealthy as this and with resources as this, and most likely with a hierarchy of the enslaved within that labor force and a great deal of diversity among the lived experiences. So with each of those are amazing stories. And one of the things we can do with archaeology, but also with architecture, with restoration, with every fingerprint you find in a brick, is to go ahead and to recognize that humanity. So for us, it's a great challenge, and it's a great question, because it certainly helps people get connected to the issues that we really want to discuss. But perhaps a number that I like to share with people recently, and sorry for taking up too much time on this answer, is that we have a remembrance structure that we built on site, which is essentially an 18th century style wood frame building that's up on piers, that's not in the location of a specific quarter, but represents all of the quarters in a way that gives us a tangible contrast with the ruin. And when we had a blessing before it was constructed, we put a call out to the community that we've been working with for several years now and asked if they would like to be there and how they would like to manage the blessing and if this was something that they would approve of, all things that went into planning ahead of time. I think we had over 75 individuals present, and I would say somewhere between like 50 and 60 of those individuals were of African descent. And it was the largest number of individuals to be on the property at the same time since 1865. Sorry, 1863. There's a mass exodus during the Peninsula Campaign when the Union came down and a lot of people left for Fort Monroe and the contraband camps. But yeah, 1863. Thanks, Thane. He gave me the shout out on that one. And we do have an amazing record at Rosewell in particular because the property owners at that time were trying to take advantage of Lincoln's initial offer at the beginning of the Civil War to reimburse property owners for their enslaved people that escaped. And so it's one of the only ones that we have for any plantation in Gloucester County, but it's because Gloucester County's records are burned, it's within the first 5 pages of the first surviving record book. And so it's easy to find, and it includes names, ages, values, occupations, everything that the property owner was using to justify getting money for reimbursement, but everything that a lot of us are desperate to see fall in the hands of descendants so they can find a connection not only to this place, but to those people and their spirits. So, those are the numbers that help extend that initial question into some of the most important work that we've been associated with and that we want to perpetuate.
Mm-hmm. Is that digitized by any chance?
Yes, we have spreadsheets. Oh, spreadsheets. But we also have a couple of small articles that were written about it in the newsletter for the Rosewell Foundation that previously worked to manage the site. And then they also had some interns over the last decade or so that have looked at not just the lives of the enslaved on the property through historical record, but also other elements of interest, including landscape and even some of the late 19th, early 20th century residences that include descendant community members now, including some that were there when it was burning. And the very noteworthy comment that is now discussed often, not only in the visitor center introduction that we filmed with descendant community members, but also just amongst anyone who visits. Is one of the older gentlemen who had been there as a slave, just yelling as it was on fire, let it burn, let it burn.
Hmm.
So,
That's interesting.
Well, for burning it,
No.
but he was definitely not going to be responsible for saving it.
Yeah. But I commend you for your research. I just asked one question about a number, and
Sorry.
but even to know that those files exist, because I know that Lincoln didn't follow through with that promise, of paying for those enslaved people at that time. So just to know that that archival file exists is new to me. So thank you for your hard work and everything that you've done. I get to Virginia a lot. I'm going to Virginia for Thanksgiving, so and I'll be there for about a week. Are you going to be closed during Thanksgiving?
Technically, we're closed for the season, but for folks who have interest, we are open 24/7.
Okay, okay. I don't know if I'll see you this trip, but I can. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So do you have time for one more question?
sure.
One more question. Okay, great. It's in the chat. And the question is, do you see any emerging technologies that young adults are uniquely positioned to champion, such as AI tools or other digital mapping tools that could help preserve and interpret Rosewell even further in ways earlier generations simply couldn't?
So we've been able to take advantage of a lot of technologies, and a lot of the driving force behind it is young people who are less expensive, to be completely honest about it. Um, Many of our staff are under the age of 30. I still consider them young because Thane and I are now 50, even though we started Fairfield when we were 25. And so some of the technologies we embrace are photogrammetry, which has been around since the late 19th century, but now that we have drone-based photogrammetry, computer algorithms that stitch those things together, we have a combination of both three-dimensional manipulatable imagery that you can see online, and then we go forward with 3D printing. So we actually have relatively small replicas of Rosewell now that we can print for its current form. And that's based through those various steps of documentation, which operate as a way for us to track stabilization, but also as an outreach tool and something that can be emotionally connective, because people who have fallen in love with this place often like to hold and to appreciate those things. The other technologies that we intend to embrace, but that are not quite within our grasp yet, would probably include LiDAR. So that's very intensive digital mapping, particularly from the air, and mostly important for us for what you see in the surrounding landscape, although some folks now have phone-based LiDAR, which you can use to go ahead and do intensive mapping of smaller objects, and in some cases used to preserve and then replicate surfaces and other things that might be destroyed because of degradation in an immediate sense, things that are deteriorating quicker than you can save them. We also are looking into remote sensing. We previously had studies done at Rosewell, but technologies have advanced so quickly within the last 10 years that we're planning to do a significant investment in ground penetrating radar to augment what we've been looking at with aerial imagery analysis, as well as just a lot of focus on cartographic resources, taking what's old and then bringing them into the current generation. It's exciting because a lot of this is just very visually intensive, and it grabs people in the ways that me droning on for hours and hours just won't rival. But also, we're just glad that we can divert some of our funds and attention to investing in youth who bring a great deal of different perspective to what we're looking at. As a final comment, I'll say a lot of our friends who are older will lament how they don't see the current generation of youth being as fascinated with history as they remember they themselves being. And I get the joy of contradicting them, because We have over 6,000 volunteer hours contributed to us each year by people in the community, and a lot of them are youths. We had over 24 interns last summer, and I think we've eclipsed 200 interns in 25 years. And the number of classroom visits that we make and the educational outreach programs that we host shows that a love of history is definitely there. There is no gap. The people who loved it now, who loved it then, are going to still be there, as long as we keep doing projects that meet them where they are, and like you said, use the things that intrigue them intellectually and fulfill them, in every way.
That is incredibly heartening to hear that and to hear about their involvement. So, as we wrap up, if you wouldn't mind just letting people who are here with us, let them know perhaps how they might be able to become involved and what they might be able to come and do if should they choose to come and volunteer.
So we have a variety of options. Obviously, our preference would be for you guys to enroll in the Adventures in Preservation program, because it also supports Adventures in Preservation, which has been a partner of ours on projects at Fairfield and the Edge Hill Service Station and at Rosewell for over a decade. They do amazing work, and having found them when we were all younger, and realizing that we had kindred spirit made us feel like we weren't alone, especially their attitude towards just connecting with people and bringing them joy through hard work and also just, collaboration. But, if for some reason that doesn't work out, we do have opportunities for people to visit, first and foremost. Those are the easiest. We do arrange private tours. So even if you're coming off season, you let us know. We'll put something down on paper. We can also go ahead and work with you if you're an educator, if you have homeschoolers, if you are local and want us to come to your classroom, or if you're not local and want us to come over Zoom. We have education and outreach specialists who are amazingly gifted at sharing what we have with people, even if you have to do it over teeny tiny little computer screens. And then we also have internships. We don't limit our internships by age, other than to say you have to be over 14, or you have to be accompanied by an adult. But we have had interns in their 70s, and we've had interns who are 14, just like we said, and everybody in between. So an internship is just another code for giving a little bit of structure to a hands-on experience, because ultimately we've had volunteers, folks who've come for years, and they just sit down a week and they say, hey, I'd love to learn. And we say, well, we love that too. So what can we do to help make that happen? We don't let money get in the way. Obviously, Judith at AIP knows that as well, because we've done entire AIP workshops with 2 people, and they're some of the most fun that we've ever had. So if you can think of something that we can do to help you reach your goals and enjoy history and keeping your hands on, let us know. You've got a willing partner in Fairfield.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And on behalf of everybody here, we really appreciate all of the work that you are doing. And thank you so much for sharing it. And hopefully we all who are here will go on to share about tonight's talk, and we'll do our own research and look up Rosewell and maybe even become involved and come to volunteer. Preservation and history is vital and important, and we know that every single day. So thank you again so much for your work. To everyone on the talk, I will send out a recording of this in a few days. So if there was something you missed or wanted to revisit, you can do so. And I will also at that time send out information about how you could go and volunteer. And if it's all right, I will include David and Kenneth and Thane's email addresses so you can correspond with them directly. So thank you again so very much for all of you for your time. And thank you again, as I mentioned in my email with the Zoom link, thank you before Thanksgiving, but thank you for caring about preservation and about history. So Good night,
Yeah.
everybody. Thank you.
See ya.